in Berlin, Germany. We have Louise Story with us. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Louise. Her CV is really impressive. It's my pleasure to bring her to the stage today from New York City, where she has worn many hats working in some of the top newsrooms in New York as a reporter, as an editor, a technologist, and strategist, to name but a few. She says that she likes to pursue projects that will move the needle in helping the world have more journalism that matters. And Louise was most recently working as the chief news strategist and chief product and technology officer at the Wall Street Journal. And that journal's editor shared this sentiment on her departure from the newspaper. Louise played a central role in advancing our digital transformation and broadening the reach and impact of our journalism. She's brought in new skills, capabilities, and ways of thinking that have elevated our journalism and greatly improved our product, our technology, and data experiences for our members. Her work has helped guide our coverage and accelerate growth in audiences and subscribers over the past 3 years. Now, Louise is joining us today to share her insights about developing new news products and the advantages for journalists to adopt a segmented audience approach to their innovation projects. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Louise.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you, Rob. I'll jump right into a presentation, and it'll take me about 10-15 minutes, and then there'll be plenty of time for your questions, and I'm excited to take your questions. So we'll start the slide presentation now. Next slide. What I'm talking about, I call focusing on the MACU. You're probably wondering what the MACU is. We'll come right back to that. Next slide. So this is meant to remind you that some of the old ways in journalism just aren't true anymore. You know, people used to think if you write it, they'll just come. You just put it out there and they'll just come and read it. And guess what? As you all know, that's no longer true. Next slide. Part of what I've found at both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal over time is if you want what you are writing and producing to be read and to be watched, you have to start thinking a lot more about the people who will read or watch it. But one of the problems in a lot of news companies is that they're very siloed. And, you know, what I found is, for example, in a lot of news companies, membership thinks about the members, and they talk about the members or the subscribers, and they talk about the members. In the newsroom, they're over there talking about the audiences, and customer service is talking about the customers. And then you have your people running product design and engineering talking about the users. And what I realized when actually my job spanned across a lot of these, you know, because I was chief news strategist at the Journal, meaning I ran the coverage, but I also was chief product and technology officer running the tech stack and design and product. What I realized is that all these different people are talking about the same people, the members, the audiences, the customers, the users, the MACU. These are the same people. And so I introduced this concept, and it's very powerful. And I encourage you all to consider introducing it explicitly about focusing on the MACU. It's the MACU rather than any one of these terms, because I feel that every one of the disciplines in a news company has value, that, you know, product and engineering has value. So there's meaning to the term users, and the way that people in membership approach something has value. So there's a reason for the word members. And I don't think you're trying to make everyone change to one part of the company's way of doing business, you know, one term. What you're trying to do is get them to acknowledge that we're all talking about the same people. And what this concept does is, A, it makes sure everyone in your company is thinking about the MACU, but that they're also thinking about it together, that you're together at the table at the same time with the people from all of these departments. Next slide. So here's an example of something we put together at the Wall Street Journal when I was overseeing content and product and technology. And I just show it as an example to show you how the experience for the readers, for the MACU, it's all converging who makes what in these companies, because you can say, what is this? I mean, it's a Twitter, this is on Twitter, and it's during the 2020 election. And what's happening here is that the Associated Press is releasing the data in real time about different states. And the data feed is coming into the Wall Street Journal, and we built this data feed, okay? But then the graphics team had built these cards that would be shown when a state is won. So that's content, and the news editors were looking at the data as it came in and declaring that it was accurate. But then our engineering teams had built this system that in real time, when the data came over to the Wall Street Journal newsroom, it would populate a card on Twitter in real time. So you see here, there's a question, what is this? Is it technology? Is it content? Is it, and I think if we go to the next slide, what you're seeing is that, next slide, what you're seeing is that it's journalism and it's software, and it's news and it's product and it's content and it's the tools we use to post it. It's all of those things combined. Next slide. And what's happening is that technology and news are merging. So as they merge, we all need to focus on the same people. Next slide. The MACU. I also wanted to talk about, if you bring focusing on the MACU into your newsroom and into your media company, the biggest question that comes up in any scenario is, well, who makes the decisions? How do you make decisions, right? Because there's a lot of times competing points of view about what to do, how to handle things. And so on the next slide, I'll show you, how I've thought about this. I think it's really important in a company when you're trying to do new things to be very open to the fact that good ideas can come from anywhere. So you want to listen for ideas from all corners. That's not only important because you'll get the best ideas, but it's also important now generationally, because your employee base, I would guess, at least what I've seen in the United States, I'm not sure in India if you have the same trends, but in the United States, employee bases are changing, and people in their 20s, 30s, early 40s now, they want to say in what the company is doing and how decisions are being made, and they want to know how they're being made. They don't want to just hear from on high that something's happening. So you need to have an open, clear process, how ideas can come from anywhere, so people know how they can contribute ideas, and so they know that how decisions are made. And that's more motivating to people in terms of working at your company. So in this diagram, we talk about how ideas could come in from people working in advertising or marketing, and they might be ideas that they got, from potential sponsors or different people in the commercial area. Ideas can come in, of course, from the MACU, meaning looking at data about what the MACU is doing in your product, meaning also looking at, so click data, looking at user research and qualitative studies, looking at the customer service logs, looking at the comments area. Those are all areas you'll find suggestions from the MACU. And then ideas, of course, can also come in from journalists. And you want to make sure you have a clear way for each of these areas to know who is capturing these ideas and who's bringing them over. And then ultimately you do need one process to review them and to prioritize. So this diagram shows the intake process that I ran and how all of these ideas come from all corners. And it shows how ultimately they come to one place so you can make decisions. Next slide. So this is something I also wanted to talk about. Embedded in this idea and this concept of the MACU is some cultural change for a lot of media companies, because, traditionally, in a lot of media companies, there's a mentality that we know what they want, and that the top editor is a tastemaker and says, this is what we're covering and this is what people want. So it's a mentality shift to say, well, we're also going to take into account what people are interested in, what feedback we're hearing from our MACU. And so these are some other types of cultural change that I think you need to undertake if you want to become more digital, if you want to transform for the future, if you want to have a culture that's more inclusive of your workers, and ultimately, if you want to make the best product and news coverage for your organization to grow. So I'll just talk through them. And this will be my last slide, and we'll go to questions. So first of all, you have to move away from them and us, this idea that there's the news side, the business side. You have to leave that behind and say, we're all serving our audiences. It doesn't mean that you break all ethical boundaries, or any ethical boundaries. It doesn't mean, for example, it's very important if the advertising unit has sold a big ad that they're not then intervening in an article. But in terms of serving your audiences, we're all serving the audiences. And that's something we can talk across the company about. You need to move away from unclear priorities or priorities that are clashing. This often happens when you have decisions being made in lots of different pockets. And one of the reasons you're seeing in a lot of news companies, chief product and technology officers like I was, with a big prioritization across the whole organization, or sometimes you're seeing general managers, is because there is a realization that you need more centralized decision-making so you can have a consistent set of goals across all the units and one purpose. I've also seen news companies sometimes essentially doing what they want to do, units doing what they want to do, and then they retrofit KPIs on there. They say, oh, well, here's how we'll show that worked. And it can't be about doing what you want to do and then putting a number on to show it worked. It has to be, here's the goal, and let's see if this is going to deliver the goal. I've also seen sometimes companies have KPIs across the company in different areas that clash. If this team achieves this goal and this team achieves this goal, they're going in a different direction. That can happen, for example, if you focus on different parts of the audience too much. Like if you have one part of the company where you're focusing a lot on very loyal readers and trying to do everything to get them to come back, and then another part of the company where you're focused only on growth, sometimes those two things are aligned, but sometimes there's choices where they oppose each other. And you need to be clear across the company what's more important. It's very important you have centralized data teams. You don't want a data team in one part of the company calculating numbers differently from another data team. It makes it very difficult for your team members on the ground, as well as your executives, to even have a conversation when they have different data sets. So you need to have streamlined metrics where they're calculated the same way. You need clear direction, where you're trying to go, what the North Star is. You need to make sure that you're sharing work. Sometimes you could do the same work in different departments if you're not talking and sharing. It's very helpful to have teams that cut across different disciplines. So if you want to go after a goal of, for example, growing your audience and one of your products or creating a new product, you should make a team that has people from marketing and from technology and from news on one team. So they're working together every day, and then they can report back and let the units know how it's going. But you need to make cross-departmental teams. Clear direction from the top. And then it's very important, this last point, again, it has been the case in some news companies that, the style is just, here's what we're doing, let's go. And you need a leadership now that's more about listening, digesting, talking about how you make decisions, providing guidance on what the goals are, but involving others in the decision-making. So that's it on my slides. I'll stop there and happy to take your questions. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Louise. Yeah, can everyone hear us? Thank you very much. That's really a lot to digest. And it's a huge challenge, like you said, to the culture. Just like work from home has been a challenge to newsroom culture. And so maybe as news reporters and editors start to return to the office more frequently, there's an opportunity there to embrace a different way of working, right? Do you see that this is kind of a moment to adopt, because these things don't exist a lot and still in a lot of newsrooms. I've worked with a number of Indian publishers over the last couple of years, and the things that you're bringing up are exactly the things that I found are still being resisted. These things of really understanding the audience, not just as a mass volume of group of one, monolithic user, ultimate user to fill, but being more intelligent about segmenting as you have across the enterprise. How do you feel? And now some questions are coming in, so we'll also get some more queued up here. But can you just talk a little bit more about culture change? Yeah.
Yeah. So, you really have to have the desire for culture change at the top and across the different units at the top. So, and if the people who are the leaders do not want culture change, or they may say they want it, but they don't really understand, like, well, what does that mean? And that's why I made that table I put up there, because if you go line by line by line by line in that table, you get a pretty clear idea about what does it mean to do culture change. So you need to get your leaders together and not just say, hey, we're going to do culture change, and have them say, oh yeah, we're going to do culture change. You got to get them together and say, well, what does that mean to do culture change? What are all the things that we are going to change? How we once did it this way, now we're going to do it this way. And they all need to agree to that. I think when the leadership agrees, it can be very helpful. I think you'll find, because a lot of the things that I've talked about that can really help companies grow more and better serve their MACU, they are things that generationally up and coming workers tend to favor. And so my experience at two of the largest media companies has been, it hasn't been generally the frontline journalist workers, the frontline people in marketing and tech who are holding out on the change. It's often the leaders who don't like the idea of losing some of their power through a more inclusive and modern way of interacting with your customer and reader and audience.
Yeah, it is that. You feel like there's some kind of loss of control, like they don't see the value in perhaps giving up some top-down kind of control when they could be serving their audiences better, their MACU better. So MacDoom writes, working with cross-departmental teams. What are some of the tips to get everyone on the same page? You kind of mentioned it about actually involving people outside the newsroom, but what else?
Well, I mean, with cross-departmental teams, one of the first places I really saw this work very well was some of the things that we did at the New York Times. You may have heard of the innovation report. There was a very big report. It came out in 2014. I worked on that. And around that same time, the New York Times launched some new products, the cooking app, which has been very successful for the Times, the cooking app.
I subscribe. So,
you subscribe. Yeah, it's a great
and I've become a better chef. So, I'm hooked.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
the way, we were in all those groups where we were looking at how we were going to change things is that they were cross-disciplinary teams. And, at first, you came into the team and they were people you had not worked with before, and they approached questions differently than you did in many cases, and the starting point was like different. It was a different method, and that can be disorienting at first. And I remember, myself feeling that way a little bit at the very beginning of the innovation committee. But, when you realize, well, this is the way we're going to work listening to all these different ways of thinking about it and figuring out a way that we can jointly move forward that's not driven by one person here, then you listen and you start hearing like really smart ways to do things that you hadn't thought of. And that was really, eye-opening and formative for me. And since then, I've always wanted to work that way. And that's why I became interested myself in also continuing to broaden my own skill set and my own set of disciplines, because I think you can be more creative and find solutions to problems better by drawing on a lot of different ways of doing things. So I think it's very doable, but you just have to, everyone in there in the room needs to know, like, there's not a superior way of doing this. We need to listen to all the different ways and work together and find what's right for each question.
Well, and newsrooms are famous for that kind of dynamic of inferiority, superiority complex, where if you don't have all the answers, you feel inferior, and if you have all the answers, you're superior. And one of those things that like working in cross-functional teams does is it kind of distributes the expertise, right? So then the challenge becomes about the personal dynamics. Again, because dominant personalities will tend to dominate those discussions. So following up on what MacDoom says, what were some of the techniques that you guys, because I'm sure that came up, do to deal with that so that all voices are heard?
Well, There's a few different things. So first of all, and these are really kind of management and leadership questions, but I'll tell you some things that I've done that have worked very well. So first of all, I learned over the last many years while being a leader that it was very important for me to understand that not everyone communicates and works the same way that I do. So for example, I'm pretty quick on my feet. So I used to go into a meeting and present an idea and then ask everyone what they thought. And I learned over time, and I learned by in one-on-ones asking for feedback. I learned that some people wanted more time to think about it before they responded. And what's wrong with that? That's great. I want thoughtful replies so it was suggested to me that I shouldn't present something new in a meeting in front of everyone. I should always send out before I had the meeting, the prompt and what I was thinking. And so people could come in and be more thoughtful. And so I changed that. And when I changed it, some people I think responded the same way they would have on the spot, but other people contributed to the meetings more. I mean, there were people who were not speaking in meetings that once I set the document out ahead, they started speaking in meetings. So suddenly we're getting a more variety in views on it, and the outcomes are better because you're paying all these people, you've hired all these people to work for you. I mean, why do you have them there if you're not running the place in a way that you can make the most of their intelligence?
Yeah. So just putting out an agenda note. So sometimes sometimes the solutions are very simple, right? When you look back at them, I've been in so many of these sessions where when you look back and say, why didn't we just all agree to that in the first place? It's so simple. If we just add this little thing, and it makes it better for everyone. So thank you for sharing that personal experience. So Dipankar says direction from the top. Would the top, I assume the top of an organization, be a journalist or a non-journalist? Should the head of the newsroom, I guess, and will journalists take commands from a non-journalist? In other words, I think this is what you said, tech and journalism are definitely merging, but who should be in charge?
I think that in terms of the content, it should be a journalist who highly values the audience interest and is highly proficient in looking at data and values and cares about, well, are people interested in this or not? And more, it's important for your news outlet to also offer community features. So, wants to understand the community of readers who are coming to you. And there are journalists, I'm one of them, and I know others, who, have written prize-winning investigations and have a lot of credibility as reporters and editors in film and video and text, but who also understand data and understand the importance of bringing in that data as a factor. It's not the only factor. I mean, let's be clear. You can't just look to the data about what people are reading necessarily to drive all future coverage. The reason is, as a reporter, as an editor, you have to look around the corner sometimes. Like, you have to uncover new things. Well, by definition, if you're uncovering a new thing, there wouldn't be a past data set that would tell you people want that because it's a totally new thing. So data will not point every story out to you, but it needs to be an important factor, and it will point out better ways to tell stories. It will point out some stories, and it'll help you do retrospects on stories you have done to understand, well, we thought this was really going to be interesting to people, but it wasn't. So what was that about it? So I think you need a journalist running the newsroom who takes seriously MACU thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of points to another question. Here it's coming from Anonymous. Any crystal gazing thoughts, if you could peer into your crystal ball, on how things be in the US in 2022 in terms of audience reach and traditional media as the primary source of news?
Well, a lot of news outlets have traffic down now compared to how high it was in 2020, because, in 2020, it was the peak of the pandemic, and in the United States, there's a presidential election. Now with the war that's going on, that would be an increase in traffic in a number of places. So, news is cyclical and it is tied to when there's big stories. That's always been the case. And I think that will be the case. A lot of news orgs are trying to make sure that they are covering a broader set of things than just breaking news, and creating content and product features that are useful no matter what's going on in the news. I mentioned New York Times cooking, for example, and at the Wall Street Journal, I oversaw the creation of a bunch of personal finance guides and career guides and things that like people need no matter what, even when the news is slow. And so that's one thing I think your outlet can think about also is, what are you doing for content and a product experience that's relevant even when the news is slow?
Solving problems for users in their daily lives, like personal finance, saving for college, whatever. Cooking is an everyday experience, a great one to be inspired by, that has nothing to do with news. I think that is right. I think you're right. It does take a very curious journalist to be peeking around the corners and yes, observing trends, but not necessarily putting all your resources into necessarily chasing them, because we've seen that those kind of are very cyclical. Those can crash very quickly. But to take all of the knowledge from things that don't work as well, I think that's a huge character trait, right? That failing in something, if an experiment fails, if a product or service you develop isn't working according to what you thought it would be, that's not necessarily a wasted effort. In fact, it can be more valuable. You talk a little.
Well, especially, on that point, on that point about a product, quote unquote, failing, or a story not doing as well as you thought. That's true. You can learn from everything. The only thing is, though, it's important that you do take a look at the number. A lot of times places will launch a new product feature or will put a story out and not really look at the numbers and just keep doing more of it. And so it's important when you're doing something new. One of the things this cross-disciplinary group that you're working on to this new thing should agree on is, what's the frequency with which we're going to evaluate how this is doing, and what will be the metric that will tell us whether it's successful or not? And agree. And you've got to do that. So building in time for your teams to learn and iterate is really important. So I created at the Journal a weekly meeting we called the Momentum Meeting every Monday, where people from across the company, from reporters in the newsroom and engineers and people from marketing, a lot of different divisions, frontline people doing all the great work at the company, would come together, and usually hundreds of people would come. And we would do two things in the meeting. One, we would look at a story that had run recently and talk about what worked in it and what could have been better. And it was very open and candid. And because we did this regularly, no one was offended if you gave a suggestion, because the whole spirit of the meeting was like, we're learning. And then the second half of the meeting, we would look at something in our product, something more, around our technology and what we were learning. And it created a very open, candid conversation set up. And interestingly, I was at the Journal 3 years, and 1.5 of my years of my time there was remote. And I actually feel that the Zoom or the Google Hangout setup was very leveling in those meetings. There was no one at the official seat, and everyone's just on the grid. And so, anyone would speak up with questions or thoughts that they had on those things. So I think, learning from what you're doing. And I've also seen in some places that people running different teams sometimes, be it someone running reporters or be it someone running an engineering team, there can be a mentality of like, you get that thing done and you move to something else. You get that story out and you get to the next one, or you ship that new feature on the website and you move to the next one. But the thing is that you're missing a lot of opportunities if you do that, because I've seen in both cases, because I've run reporting teams and engineering teams, that when the reporter puts the story out, like just give them a day or two to like read all the comments, respond to the reader email, look at the data, do a brainstorm on what's next, and like the next story they might do related to that one will be even better versus them just like running away, and same with the engineers when they put out like a new microsite. Okay, let them look at its performance data. Let them, look at the customer service logs of what's coming in. And they may come back and say, like, it's working pretty well, but like, if you give us one more week, it'll be much better. Like, let them iterate. Because you learn a lot by seeing your story or your product feature or your marketing in action and adjusting.
Yeah, I like that idea of momentum, and I'm sure it takes a lot of energy to get that momentum started. But that when you make that regular appointment to say, "Hey, let's just sit back and just kind of review what's working, what's not." Do you think that grid structure, as we said, going back into the office, should we be really thinking about that user experience? Are people, do you hear stories of people redesigning how the office is going to work so that it is more egalitarian, so that it is less head of the table kind of schoolmaster run news meetings?
Well, I mean, I don't know, for everyone on this call, what you're seeing in terms of your team base and your employee base and whether they want to be in the office. But I mean, I know that there's a lot of really talented employees who don't plan to be in the office in the same way anymore. So I kind of think if like the bosses just think they're going to go back and just drag everyone back to the old world, they're deluding themselves. So I would suggest if anyone is going back to the office or you're trying to get your teams back to the office, that you recognize that you should permanently be open to remote workers as well. Some of your, even people who worked for you 10 years may now have decided that's how they're going to work. And or people you want to recruit. I actually recruited people remotely and had part of my team remote before the pandemic because I found I could get really talented people in other parts of the world and also other parts of the United States, some with more diverse backgrounds, which was always important to me as a leader to have people from all different backgrounds if I was open to remote. And so you should do that. But then if you're really open to that, you say, do our actions mirror our words? So we say that's important to us, but what are we doing to make sure they're as included and comfortable? And one thing I would suggest, if you're having a big meeting and you've got a bunch of people who are remote, then just have everyone log on the computer and be equal in that hangout. Don't have, the 10 people in the room and then the other people are out of the room on the screen. It's not
Exactly
conducive
what we're
anyways.
seeing.
I don't think that that's like as inclusive
exactly.
on people there.
So how do
By
we
the way,
change
for the
that?
people, for the people in the room, by the way, when they speak up, the way they look to the people in the Zoom is they're just like a little person at the table. They'd be more effective in making their points anyways, if they're up in front of the screen. So I think rethinking a little bit about what the office is for, how you're convening groups of different sizes and how to make sure, all voices can be heard is important.
Yeah. And there's a lot of psychological cues from that. If you're standing, you have dominance, if you're bigger on the screen, like you said, I mean, there's a lot of things to consider in trying to solve that problem. And I think this is perhaps a time because we are addressing leaders and CEOs of major news organizations all across the world's largest democracy right now. This is maybe a time to brainstorm and do some design thinking about the return to office to see if it can drive the culture change you want and that your users expect. We've got about 5-6 minutes left. If there's any final questions, of course, I've got a load of questions. I can just keep going, but I'm going to keep my left eye over there on the question forum for you guys to tap any questions and tap Louise Story's awesome experience. I don't want to leave without mentioning the fact that you did leave the journal to teach and to write a book. So we are going to finish with that. Promised you I would do that because that's what I did. When I left to teach and I've written a few books as well.
And I'm doing consulting too. And if anyone's interested in my book or my consulting, if you go to my LinkedIn, you'll see a link there to a free newsletter I do about the book, and you can direct message me if you want to follow up.
Fantastic. How effective has public powered journalism? This is one thing when I've been working with Indian publishers and journalists on innovation and digital transformation that has really struck a chord with them to break through this monolithic view of what our audience is, the mass production machine thinking. public power journalism, involving the audience with story development around issues that are or much earlier at the beginning of the reporting, rather than just waiting until you're in and you're published or you've gone on air with it.
That's a great phrase. I haven't heard that phrase before. I'm gonna steal that from you. Public power journalism. Yeah, it's a great phrase, and I love public power journalism. I've always called it participatory journalism, but I love public power too. I'm taking that. I will tell you.
If you do, give all credit to Jennifer Brendel.
Jennifer. Okay, I love Jennifer Parkin. Okay, I'll definitely cite her. Yeah,
Chicago representing. I was working at the Sun Times and the Tribune. She worked in radio. But basically the idea is that why wait until you hit publish or go on air with a story to involve the public? That there's so many opportunities.
Let me tell you about, I agree with you. It's very important. And that's something I was a leader in for both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And one of the most powerful things I led at the New York Times, it's a very cool experience, was in 2016 and 2017, I led live video there. And we would do usually 10 segments around the world every day. And it'd be on topics from cooking to covering, a coup attempt in Turkey, to covering, all kinds of things out of the pyramids in Egypt. And but we had a requirement that I set up that reporters, when they were live reporting and we were airing it live, had to in real time be taking, usually I told them it should be a 30-year questions. The real-time questions that were being put in from the audience, they had to ask some of those questions in the interview. And what it did was it changed the interview and it changed the answers. And suddenly, we did one with an interview with Julian Assange, which, by the way, Julian Assange would only agree to the interview because it was aired live, because he was like, great, they're not going to just take the quote, cherry pick a quote, the whole thing is live. So that's why he agreed to the interview. And about a third of the questions came from the audience. And in fact, for example, in that case, some of the quotes that got in the written article from him were in response to audience questions. So now the article is different. And by the way, that article then was part of a Pulitzer Prize winning package. So it changes the journalism. And that was really exciting. And at the Journal, I introduced a lot of different features, including these different forms we put up regularly. They still use them all the time, to ask the audience to participate in different stories and some live different Q&As with the audience. And so I think it's a very important part, not only of helping your audience be invested, engaged in what you're doing, but also if you take it seriously, it should change what you're doing. And as a journalist myself, it's exciting to me. That's one of the reasons why I'm writing my book, by the way. I have a free newsletter. It's because I don't want to write my book in a black room, not talking to anyone, and have it come out and then hear what people think. Now I do this free newsletter. People write me back, people comment. I'm seeing the reaction while I write the book, and I think it's making the book better.
That's it. Participatory, public powered authoring. Yeah, exactly. That's a lot of fun. Now we've got like 1 minute left, and there's no other questions coming. Do you have a title for your book?
Yes, my book is called The Black Dollar. It's on a different topic than we've been talking about today. I'm co-writing it with a woman named Ebony Reed, and it's about race and money in America and how historical actions affect the lives of Black Americans today.
Wow. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And can't wait to hear more about that book project coming up. I know that this conference is going to close very shortly for today. I want to thank you, Louise, for sharing some great insights and having a great chat with me about product thinking and how to bring it into the newsroom. That conversation will be continuing at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, India Standard Time. Hope to see you there. It's a very fascinating topic, one that is done, hopefully, with a lot of momentum and an ongoing purpose. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm Rob Montgomery signing off from Berlin. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you all. Bye. Thanks, Rob.